We're live.
Nice to meet you too.
This is Geek Gab with your hosts, John, Brian, and me, Daddy Warpig. We are back. Wow. It is
You
February.
did it, man.
I know. Say it. Go ahead.
We've melted Daddy Warpig's brain. He botched the intro. Who's Brian?
Ladies and gentlemen, Brian was our good friend, our former podcasting host who is no longer with us as of just before the new year. And that was, well, I mean, in my defense, that was our introduction for 2.5 years?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was...
He's still with us in our hearts.
It is inscribed in my brain, that particular introduction.
Yeah, frankly, I'm surprised we made it a whole month without it happening.
And I would also like to point out that we have gone the entire month, and I haven't once said 2017.
Actually, you should listen to last week's show.
Did I? No.
Maybe.
I don't believe you. I think you're lying. I mean, that's
I could be mistaken.
That's the one thing. I mean, you'd think, we're starting a live show. I'd be worrying about technical problems, which happen upon occasion. Any people who've been listening, that occasionally technical problems show up. But you'd be thinking that I would be worrying about technical problems or whether or not a guest is ready to go or whatever. But no, the one thing I'm thinking, the number one thought chief in my mind when I start this show is get the year right. Get the year right.
Well, it is the least important part of everything.
We haven't done this for a while. We used to do this all the time. We haven't done this for a while. Did you do anything interesting this week?
I did. I've played some great board games, some great Dungeons and Dragons, and for the first time in 6 months, I think, had a great game night podcast with you. I think you were there for that. I
might have been. I don't know.
I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to remember if I got the year correct at the end of that podcast.
You were telling me something about your Dungeons and Dragons game about actually, I thought that was kind of an interesting anecdote about the thing that your characters, that your players hate the most out of everything they've run into in this dungeon.
I don't recall. We talked about a lot of things that they hate.
This was after the show, or it might have been yesterday. The monster with character class levels.
Yes, indeed. I didn't realize I hadn't said that on the show.
You haven't.
They've got a villain, and he's just terrorizing them every week. Every week, it's a null rogue, not a null creature rogue who escaped because of the morale rules and everything, and he escaped and it's a beautiful result of the rules of using smart old school rules in a Dungeons and Dragons game. They don't fight to the death. Sometimes they run away, and if a guy keeps running away and maybe gains a few extra levels in rogue and maybe trains a whole squad of nulls to also be level 1 rogues who happen to be part of wandering monster tables and ambush and gank the wizard every chance they get, players tend to hate that, and he's turned into a villain.
So they were doing something smart with one of the rooms.
You gotta jog my memory, man.
They were doing something smart with one of the rooms, but because of the situation, they were kind of strung out. And one of the characters went to tie a rope around a door to keep it closed while they waited overnight, while they rested.
Yeah, they were expecting an ambush, so they spread out and covered most of the corners. And one of the characters went to seal off one of the exits. Well, it just so happened that, I'd figured that the wandering rogues were coming upon that exit. And since they had the drop on this guy, I decided that they would open the door, fill him full of arrows, and then close the door, laughing like hyenas.
And they all succeeded.
Yeah. Yeah. One of them even crit. It was great. If it were any edition besides D&D 5th edition, that would have been instant character death.
I just think it's hilarious. You're standing there, you're about to secure the door. All of a sudden, it flies open, 4 arrows right into you. You drop to the ground, bleeding out, and they run away. And the rest of the party is just like, "What the hell just happened?" That's a beautiful moment as a dungeon master. But
I felt,
speaking
yeah.
of which,
Speaking of mastering
Dungeons and Dragons, our guest today, writer Adam Smith, did a Dungeons and Dragons podcast for 2 full years, like a live play podcast. At least that's what I got from the discussion. Am I right, Adam?
No, actually, it's a storytelling one. It teaches people how to tell stories in their D&D using all the different systems in the 5th edition.
Hey, welcome to the show. That sounds pretty great.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it was something that no one else was really doing, was just teaching people how to tell simple stories with the rule sets. So we would go through and we'd grab the backgrounds, and then we'd make every single class paired with that background. My buddy and I'd go back and forth. So we'd end up with 22 different character concepts by the end of the show with each background. So I think we did something like, I figured out it was 250 characters over the life of the show.
Wow, that's pretty, and that's really interesting because that's the opposite of the way I run my games. That I can't handle mentally. I can't handle that type of game. So I'm really interested to hear more about what you did on that podcast.
Yeah, definitely. We did it for 2 years. I think we've got 100 and something episodes up on iTunes and Google Play and all that. So be happy to bore you to death with that. Do you want me to do it now or later?
Well, let me ask you a question. Was that actually good practice for writing your own novel?
Oh, tremendously. Yeah. So we would, we'd sit down, we'd grab like the soldier background, and we'd say, okay, let's look at every single class, figure out how that would go through. And coming up with, 200 characters, that really helped me get my, my juices flowing, as it were. So when I would sit down and say, man, I need a random bartender or some jerk to be in a tavern or whenever, when I'm writing a story, boom, I could just do it right on the spot because I've done it so many times.
So, your book just came out last week, right?
I think so. Yeah. Last Sunday, there was a big old blizzard.
And why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, my story is called Making Peace. It began its life as a fantasy story. About halfway through, maybe 2/3 of the way through, it turned into a sci-fi story. So it's a fantasy story on a sci-fi backdrop. The main character is a romance novelist who's heavy in debt. He goes to this off-the-grid, low-technology planet with swords and sorcery. He links up with a group of soldiers who are peacekeepers there, and they get involved in this multi-murder mystery going back and forth, trying to prevent a civil war on the planet.
I'm waiting for John to ask a question because it's his turn. And he's sitting there. He's not. What's the deal?
You actually went really fast on that. Can you go over the I heard Civil War and then the rest of it is just, I apologize.
No, dude, you're all good. It's a weird setup. So they're on this low technology planet. It's a science fiction, but like I said, it's sword and sorcery, basically, is what this is. So it's a low technology planet. A lot of magic. I tried to work the magic in, so it was, nanotechnology and whatnot. I didn't want it to stick out or be weird. One thing I don't like about stories is when the magic is this huge, overwhelming piece of it and it stands out every time it's used. So I try to weave it in as more of a support role into the world. The main character has a huge attitude problem that he begins the story with. He ends a little bit different in one direction or another. Trying to think. Anything that you'd like to know? Anything specific?
Well, I like that you pointed out the magic system thing. A lot of fantasy sword and sorcery books are going to make the story about that. I think famously the Eye of the World, was that the one? The Eye of the World, the series by Robert Jordan. That was
Wheel of
all
Time.
about, the Wheel of Time. Yeah, the Eye of the World was the first book, I think. The Wheel of Time series was all about the magic system. It had everything to do with what was going on in the world. You sort of couldn't separate it. So it's interesting so does that mean that you're getting more about the characters and what they do, or?
Yes, exactly. Well, for a living, I'm a clinical psychotherapist, so I wanted to tell a story about these characters, but I work with a lot of people who have trauma. My specialty at work is trauma and PTSD. And a lot of people that I work with have no idea what that is. They've never seen it. They've never even seen it portrayed anywhere. So I wanted to kind of showcase that in a story without being preachy, without being message fiction. I wanted to give people a chance to see what a panic attack might be like. So around that, I was going to have to build up a bunch of characters that were going to be more like regular people. So it is much more maybe of an introspective novel in some places. Maybe some people won't like that. A lot of people have responded pretty well to it, but
So does it take the form of, a character maybe presents a sort of problem or difficulty in their lives, and you can show in the novel, here's a good way to help resolve that or overcome that or deal with it. Is that what you're doing with your background?
sort of. I didn't really want it to be like, here's how you overcome this problem as much. The message and fixing it, a lot of it is getting involved with your community, getting involved with the people around you, making use of a social support network, opening up, being vulnerable to other people, solving your problems in that way. So it's not as much like, here's the basic steps you would take to overcome this issue as much. It's more of human beings need emotional intimacy. We need meaning. We need connection. We need a mission in life. If we have those things, then we can overcome just about anything.
Writing a novel takes a lot of work, takes a lot of time. Most people don't realize, unless they've actually tried to sit down and write a novel themselves, don't realize the time commitment involved. What was it that drove you through all of that effort to get it done?
Well, my novel took me almost exactly 3 years from start to finish. The first, I want to say 6 months, was just listening to KM Weiland, her helping writers become authors podcast, just listening and binging episodes so I could learn how it was, what I should be doing, and then learning an outline process, and then actually sitting down and kind of writing. During that time, I was working on my licensure at work to get licensed. I had a kid, my first child ever. Started a new job, then started a second new job. It was a mess. So yeah, it definitely was a trial. What got me through was just that I love storytelling so much. I knew that I had this story I wanted to tell people. More than that, though, maybe it was being connected in the author community, having a connection with other authors, seeing their success, seeing other people kind of encourage each other. That was a great help. I don't think I would have made it through if I wasn't connected to other authors who were right there with you in the nitty gritty, who were involved in their storytelling, and you could see them living it out right there. So you'd have an example of success.
Did you ever get involved in things like National Novel Writing Month?
Personally, no. I could see how it would be helpful for some people. I much prefer smaller communities that aren't focused on a month like that as much. That helps people, but I prefer small writers groups where the people are vetted pretty well, so you don't have a lot of drama popping up. There's a small religious group that I'm a part of, for example. We do some writing. A couple different author accountability groups of just 2 or 3 people that just get on each other and just write each other. If you don't write this week, hey, everyone's going to be laughing at you, kind of thing. That seemed to help me a lot more than like NaNoWriMo.
What was the most difficult thing about writing your novel?
Oh boy. Probably the negative people in the community that worked to sort of trash my career a little bit. That would probably be the hardest because it robs you of some of that wind in your sails. It makes things a little rough. Just some of those negative influences. That was probably the hardest part for me, to be honest with you. If you're talking actual process, hardest piece, that would probably. Boy, that was a tough one. Probably just actually making myself sit down and create a disciplined schedule where I would sit down and actually do the writing. That was the hardest piece for me because there would be, I think there was a 4 to 6 month gap where I just stopped writing. I got so undisciplined, I just stopped. I had so much going on in my life. That probably set me back quite a bit. I think once I established a good schedule on the weekends, found my time that I write well, it's in the morning for me, set it up so I could write consistently for several hours, it just poured out like water at that point. And then I loved that schedule, so I'd stick to it.
So if you were to, who are your biggest like influences, either positively or negatively, as far as your writing goes? Is there anybody who you looked up to that you thought, yeah, I want to have some of that in my writing?
Nick Cole, by far. I had a major disruption with one of my editors, not editors. I'm sorry, the first publisher for whom I was writing this book. We had a, shall we say, a very religious disagreement, and it became known that I was informed essentially that I was no longer welcome in the company because of my religious views. And at that time, I found that Nick was having much the same issue. So I contacted him, and he's just the sweetest man you'd ever want. He's so supportive. So I do look up to Nick Cole. As far as in the writing community, he's probably my number one hero that I really look up to. Brian Niemeyer has been fantastic. I think he was on the show with you guys, right?
Yes, he was.
Yeah, we might have mentioned him earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. He was my editor. Fantastic guy to work with. Super professional. My book would not be even half as good as it is right now without a lot of the work that he put in.
This is really great and heartening to hear that we're putting together a community, because it's not as if writers don't need that sort of support and professional contacts to work with, and hearing about troubles that you've had and Nicole have had and lots of other people with the bigger publishers, the more established publishers. It's good to know that you guys have a way to sort of pull together and make the books happen, make the writing still happen. Despite the obstacles of the so-called gatekeepers.
Yeah, you're definitely right. I would have quit. I seriously think I would have quit writing when the rug got pulled out from under me. I would have quit writing if I hadn't read an article online about Nick's struggle that he was going through, and then I reached out to him, and he instantly emailed me right back. He was super supportive. I'm thinking, here's this guy. He's got already good success. Why the heck is he talking to nobody like me? I'm so far from even publishing a book, but he was right there, man. He was willing to talk and engage, and he's been a good support ever since. I would have quit without that. And then the rest of the writing community, my buddy John Della Rose is one of them. There's a lot of really good authors out there that I've got to know. It's been fantastic. I would not be here, and I would not have published this book if it were not for other authors, quite frankly.
So if you were to list other fantasy novels that were like yours or reminiscent of your approach, what would they be?
Boy, that's a tough one. It was very influenced, some of the darker elements of it. I felt it was okay to go that direction, to tell those traumatic stories, because I read a lot of Mark Lawrence. I don't want to say that I'm as dark as him, but a lot of the content might be similar. I love a lot of his work. Trying to think what else. You know what? A lot of the fantasy pieces, one complaint that I did hear from someone, very few complaints, but the one complaint I did hear was that some of my action scenes might be a little bit more anime style. I think that might come from reading some of the translated Japanese light novels that have come over. Let me think. Is It Wrong to Try to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon is a series that I love. I think I'm on the 8th or 9th book right now as far as light novels. So that might have influenced me a little bit. So there's that horrendous, dark, brutal fantasy, and then some of the more lighthearted pieces.
So for those in the audience who don't know, what is a light novel?
Light novels around 70,000 words. Nick Cole and Jason Onspach, their Galaxy's Edge series, very similar. Light novels tend to be a little more pulpy, a little bit more action-packed. It's in your face. It's shorter than the other ones, so it's a little more concise. You don't have as many maybe sideline stories or sidebars to it. It's a little bit more concentrated, and it's meant to just be read cover to cover.
So it's a short book.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And it's meant to usually complement a whole series, so you can pump them out a lot faster. Instead of a book every 6 months to a year, you can pump out a book every, 4 months.
So how long is this book?
This book, 108,000 words.
Okay, so that's pretty normal for a fantasy novel.
Yep, right around there. Yep, they're tending towards shorter these days, but as far as the big publishers, that's what I was originally told to aim for, is about 100,000.
And are you planning on trying to your next novel? Are you going to be shooting for that same length, or are you trying to shoot for something shorter?
I am going for shorter. Nick Cole and Jason Unspach had this great podcast. They teach you kind of how they succeeded with Galaxy's Edge. So I'm kind of incorporating some of that. I've got 6 books planned out. I'm working on a Neolithic fantasy novel. It's a series of 6 books, 70,000 words each. It's going to be just action-packed. So I'm going to boil through that whole series fast.
Action-packed, so Clan of the Cave Ninja?
Kinda, yeah. Basically, I've been playing a lot of Monster Hunter World. I do like the original Clan of the Cave Bear and the Clan of the Cave Bear movie. Not so fond of the series as it went on. It kind of turned into a more adult, shall we say, adult bend that maybe wasn't as great. But the original was fantastic. So I'm kind of trying to combine that.
Personal, totally selfish question. Do you have your new book in dead tree form?
I definitely do. That was a big thing I wanted. I love paperbacks. I love that feel. There's just nothing to replace that. And it is available on Amazon. I did it through CreateSpace. So.
Oh, very good. Very good. And do you know how many pages that comes in at?
I'm sorry. Off the top of my head, I don't. I want to say 270 something, but off the top of my head, I do not know.
By the way, folks, if you're interested in checking out the book, I've got a link to it in the description below the video. So you can just click on that. It'll take you right to Amazon, and you can give it a try.
I was hoping you'd link to it, because when you just type Adam Smith into Amazon, there is no way I'm ever going to be at the top 10 pages of that.
Do you have any thoughts on the Wealth of Nations?
I think out of all the possible systems that we humans could come up with, I think that one describes the best one. Unfettered capitalism that's guided by moral principles, and so you get tax favors for that. I think that's brilliant. If you can encourage people to want to do good things, great.
You just lost all your communist readers, man.
Hey, good. Good. They can't afford books anyway.
All right, we are running down to the wire here. We've got about 5 minutes left. Do you have any last words before we go?
Last words before we go. Boy, I could give a bunch of shout outs to really cool authors like Rhett C. Bruno. He helped me with my launch. He was great. Last thoughts before I go. You know what? The thing that I learned from this book, writing this book more than anything else, is that we need to do things we're passionate about. And you need to push your way through those passion projects, because passion will only get you so far. If you're doing something you enjoy and you really want to do it, buckle down and discipline yourself, find a schedule, find a method, and go through it, and you'll actually do it, and you'll have a sense of accomplishment when you're done. But passion is not enough.
Do you have any last thoughts before we take off?
I've got just a real quick question. You mentioned Monster Hunter World.
Mm-hmm.
Are you doing any kind of tabletop RPG sort of gaming? What kind of gaming are you doing these days?
I am, yes. So right now I'm involved in a 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons Adventures in Middle-earth campaign right now. I'm playing a elf from Mirkwood who is too cheerful for Mirkwood, so they've kicked him out as an ambassador to the dwarves. It's the worst punishment they could think of.
That's cute. I like that. Well, I'm gonna have to pick your brain sometime, because you're one of those new type of D&D players who likes that sort of story with a background for per character game, and so we're gonna have to definitely pick your brain one day on that, because that's the opposite of how I play.
I love that. I pick the background first, and then the class just sort of falls in with the personality for me.
That's definitely a good way to do it, especially if it doesn't line up with your stats when you do 3d6 straight.
It's beautiful when that happens. You get this weird, complex character that's completely unlike anything else you've ever played.
You make the min-maxers in the group twitch
Mhm.
uncontrollably.
Oh yeah, they look at me with this mixture of horror and disgust and pity, and it's a beautiful thing to see.
Good to hear it.
All right, folks. We are going to take off today. We thank Adam Smith for coming on the show. This is Geek Gab. We're available on youtube.com/Geek Gab. We're also available on the iTunes Store. We're available on the Google Play Store, and we're available on soundcloud.com. Just do a search for Geek Gab. We're here generally about once a week, generally about this time. Thanks, everybody who showed up in the chat. And I just want to let you know, folks, that you don't have to worry because we're signing off for today, but we will be back.